Hello and welcome to part 3 of the Chapter 54 review. We're going to talk about some miscellaneous topics you guys had questions about. I'll be taking more breaks because I have pizzelles and I'll be snacking while I make this video. So, sitting out on my deck out back, it's kind of chilly. I think I'm going to go inside, but it was a little loud inside. So, we're going to start this up here in a second. Alright, so I'm still outside. It's still cold. I went all Frodo, pulled my hood up, put on a hoodie. We go full screen here. Now, you have to take a look at this chapter. It talks about segregation versus integration. You have to remember there's two groups that dealt with segregation. You had the some of the southern whites and some of the whites in other areas of the country that wanted to keep their people segregated by the color of their skin, and you had some of the African American groups, Nation of Islam, and the other groups that wanted to keep people separated by color. So you have to keep that in mind. It wasn't necessarily all African Americans wanted to be integrated. You had those groups on both sides, and you had people on both sides that wanted integration, both whites and African Americans. Pause for coffee because it's really, really cold out. It's not nearly as warm as it's supposed to be. You have two other ways of thinking: nonviolence versus do what it takes to succeed. The nonviolent group, this is where the media comes into play. The group that advocated for nonviolence, they knew, that was their belief, number one. But above and beyond that, they knew the perception, what's going to hit the press, what's going to be on television and in newsreels is the reaction to what happens. You guys know in school, the first person that does something, the instigator usually doesn't get in trouble. It's whoever reacts to the instigator. So they would, possibly not show the initial action, but they would show the protesters being violent. So it took a lot of self-control, I guess is the term you would use. A lot of self-control to not react violently when they were being attacked and being, called names. They're not fighting back. Then you had the other group through, the Black Panther Party and Nation of Islam and some of the other groups. CORE eventually turned a bit. Do what it takes to fight violence with violence, and we'll talk about that in a second when we get into the pains and gains section. You have to, if they're being violent towards you, you be violent back towards them, because turning the other cheek may be a sign of weakness. So there's two philosophies behind the civil rights movement that move forward, and we talked about this previously numerous times in class and then over the course of being online. The public perception, media, people may not believe, I know I have friends who are police officers, or I have friends who are in this, this job, this career path. I don't see them doing something like that. I don't believe this would be happening. It doesn't happen in my community. Who would do such a thing? Well, now they're seeing video. They're seeing on their television screens, they're seeing these things going on. And this behavior going on, and they're, it's being brought to their attention. I can't say this enough, but it's not like today where you could fake videos and you can Photoshop people into things. It wasn't easy to do, so people, when they saw things, they believed it because that's their perception, and that's what they're seeing, and they're actually seeing these videos like, man, that would never happen in my town, but it's happening there. This is unacceptable. And even from the standpoint, I can't believe they weren't doing anything to be, for the police to turn fire hoses on them or set the police dogs. They had to be doing something. And then you see that video that, wow, they weren't doing anything, and it becomes believable. So media really, really pushes the civil rights, propels the civil rights movement forward by people being able to see what's going on. And a lot of times it's actions that, would be hard to believe. Even today, people are like, I can't believe that actually happened. But you could see the video and you see what's actually going on. So now we're going to jump to a couple of the sections people had questions about. chapter 54, section E, pains and gains. There are many pluses, and we're going to stick with what is listed in the book. That's pretty straightforward. Some people weren't sure of the minuses. Through your Black History Month projects, you had one of the things was the church bombings, where several young girls were killed and many people were injured. It was a church in Birmingham that was very active. A lot of activists went there. They blew the church up, killed some children. It wasn't until 20 years later that people were actually arrested and convicted. Even the murders, Emmett Till. We talked about that in the last video also. He was a young boy from Chicago visiting down south, and years later it comes out that within the last, I want to say 10 years, the woman who instigated this, who said, he hit on me, he grabbed me, touched me, flirted with me, which was uncalled for behavior back in the day. It was unacceptable behavior. Even if she would have been single, it would have been uncalled for back in where they lived. But the punishment did not fit the infraction. She came forward and said, he never flirted with me. He didn't whistle at me. He didn't try and touch me inappropriately. But he was murdered for it. And the two men that killed him, after their trial, they were found not guilty. They laughed about it and allegedly told people, yeah, we did it, but you can't be tried twice for the same crime. So you have this violence going on. You have lynchings. You have there are people going out to register. Medgar Evers coming home from watching a meeting, watching the President JFK speak, was murdered in his driveway in front of his house. You have Martin Luther King Jr. being shot. You have, from within the black community, you have Malcolm X being shot by members of the Nation of Islam because of a disagreement between philosophies and a falling out between Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, and Malcolm X. You have other people, I forget their names and I apologize for that. We didn't go over that in class because of time constraints, but you have some African Americans and some white students that were down south doing voter registration, and it took a while for their bodies to be found. They were murdered just for trying to register people to vote. Then you have the violence against other individuals and the protesters going on. So as this is making the paper, people are realizing, like, this is messed up. This should not be happening. Oops, and I just lost a Putzel and some paper with the wind blowing. That's not good. I'm going to pause for a second and be right back. Okay, we're jumping down to 54G, the long hot summer. I talked about that a good bit in the last video, so I'm going to keep this brief. The protests go from nonviolent to violence. That's due to deaths, and with Martin Luther King being assassinated, some of the voices that really pulled people to nonviolence are being lost. And the arguments made that, look, nonviolence is just getting people killed. So you have this anger building as the wind chimes are picking up with the wind. I don't know if you could hear that in the background somewhere in the headset. Also, protests grow from just racial in nature to anti-war protests. You have counter-protesters that are pro-war, and this continues into the 70s. So you get that long, hot summer of violence that carries over into, throughout from Southern California through the northern cities. And you have racial riots and civil unrest in many cities in the late 60s and early 70s. At the end of 54G, talks about the Great Society, which was President Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ. It was his social program to help minorities and help inner cities and raise people up from the situations they're in, which low socioeconomic situations, not enough money, not good jobs, trying to create equity in education and things of that nature. It was this huge, expansive program that he put into place in the late 60s. Then we get into 54H, focus on Malcolm X, which you really need to know about him. Some of you know a good bit about him. He was charismatic. He, in the beginning, was anti-integration. We talked about that. Understand why. Go back into the chapter, look that over. You have the groups of people that say we should keep races separated. They don't have their best interest in mind with each other. And from both sides of the aisle, white and African American. Read up on that. Understand why he had that. Understand also this falling out with Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam led to his death. Why did he have that falling out? There was a change of heart. And you'll get into the religions and such next year in world cultures. But understand the falling out between the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X. Email me if you have any questions. 54I, Black Pride and Black Power. The shift in methods. You go from nonviolence to violence. The Black Panther Party was armed. They were considered in some circles terrorists. I think there are other organizations that consider them that. There was armed conflict with police and others back in the day between those parties. Then you have the Black Pride, where pop culture changes in focus. You start being more inclusive instead of everything being geared towards one group in society. You start encouraging others. And that continues on today. If you look at commercials, the makeup of families and how people are viewed in the television shows, you have different types of families being portrayed on television. And that's a good thing. But that was a focus on, hey, if you're African American, be proud of how you look, proud of your heritage, proud of your differences. And that's something that, regardless of culture, regardless of skin color, regardless of ethnic background, I believe that's something that is a good thing. So you have that Black Pride going on and a change in focus. There's also on the ebook itself, I didn't include that in the Google Doc of the ebook, but on the ebook itself, there is a quiz on the last page of the chapter. For those of you that have gone through all the quizzes and Quizlets and the review game zone and all that stuff, there's a quiz there you could fiddle with. I also posted the in Edmodo, the online study guide. You can take a look at that. That wraps up this review. Hope it helps you guys. Email me any questions. Talk to you later. Bye.